Extracts. Sections 481b 484c in exasperation, a man who is better and superior. Sections 491d 495a Socrates raises the question, pleasure which isn't good, verbal and practical resources to try to ensure that he does not get punished and does not appear before a judge. And if an enemy of yours does appear there, you have to come up with a way for him to escape and so avoid punishment. If he's stolen a pile of money, you have to make sure he doesn't give it back, but keeps it and spends it in godless immorality on himself and his acquaintances. If death is the penalty for his crime, you have to keep him alive, preferably forever, so that he never dies and his iniquity goes on and on. But if you can't manage that, you'd better ensure that he lives in his state of wickedness for as long as possible. These are the kinds of circumstances in which I think rhetoric has some use /polis. I can't see that it's any particular use to a person with no criminal intentions. Maybe it's no use at all in that situation. Nothing came up in the previous discussion to make us think it is. In exasperation, Callicles joins the fray. He cannot believe that Socrates seriously holds these revolutionary views. Socrates replies in metaphorical language that he is certainly voicing his inner convictions, and contrasts this with the worldly Callicles' obligation to voice only what accords with the changing whims of the populace. Callicles locates Polis' mistake as conceding that doing wrong is more disgraceful than suffering it. He claims that this view is merely a convention designed by the weak to suppress the strong and argues that might is right, by natural law. Socrates' aberrant views, he claims, are due to overindulgence in intellectual pursuits rather than worldly experience. Callicles ends his long and famous speech with a prophetic warning that if Socrates ever finds himself in court, his impracticality will leave him incapable of defending himself. Callicles, tell me, Carafin, is Socrates serious or is he having us on? Charphon, I think he's perfectly serious, but there's nothing like asking the man himself. Callicles, all right, I'd certainly love to do that. Socrates, may I ask you a question? Are we to take it that you're serious in all this, or are you having us on? You see, if you're serious, and if what you're saying really is the truth, surely human life would be turned upside down, wouldn't it? Everything we do is the opposite of what you imply we should be doing. Socrates, Callicles, if there weren't areas of overlap within all the individual variety of human experience, if a person's experiences were private and couldn't be shared by others, it wouldn't be easy to communicate one's own experience to anyone else. I say this because I have an idea that you and I do in fact share an experience, that of having two loves each. I love Alcibiades the son of Cleinias and philosophy, and your two loves are the Athenian populace and Demus the son of Pyrilampes. Now you're terribly clever, of course, but all the same I've had occasion to notice that you're incapable of objecting to anything your loved ones say or believe. You chop and change rather than contradict them. If in the assembly the Athenian people refuse to accept an idea of yours, you change tack and say what they want to hear, and your behavior is pretty much the same with that good-looking lad of Pyrilampes. For instance, you're so incapable of challenging your loved one's decisions and assertions that if anyone were to express surprise at the extraordinary things they cause you to say once in a while, you'd probably respond, if you were in a truthful mood, by admitting that it's only when someone stops them voicing these four opinions that you'll stop echoing them. And that's more or less what you're bound to hear from me as well, you know. So rather than expressing surprise at the things I've been saying, you should stop my darling philosophy voicing these opinions. You see, my friend, she's constantly repeating the views you've just heard from me, and she's far less fickle than my other love. I mean, Alcibiades says different things at different times, but philosophy's views never change, and what you're finding puzzling B at the moment is typical of what she says. You were here throughout the discussion, however, so it's up to you either to prove her wrong by showing, as I said a short while ago, that wrongdoing, particularly unpunished wrongdoing, is not absolutely the worst thing that can happen, or to leave this notion unrefuted. But if you leave it unrefuted, then I swear to you by the divine dog of the Egyptians that it'll cause friction between you and Callicles. There'll be discord within your whole life. And yet, my friend, in my opinion, it's preferable for me to be a musician with an out-of-tune lyre or a choir leader with a cacophonous choir, and it's preferable for almost everyone in the world to find my beliefs misguided and wrong, rather than for just one person, me, to contradict and clash with myself. Callicles, spoken like a true popular orator, I'd say, Socrates, all that passion. But it's only because what's happened to Polis is exactly what happened to Gorgias, and Polis told Gorgias off for letting you manipulate him into that situation. You asked Gorgias whether he'd teach morality to a hypothetical pupil of his who had come to learn rhetoric, and didn't he already know what was right and what was wrong? And Gorgias, according to Polis, was embarrassed into saying that he would, because people would typically be offended if anyone said that he couldn't teach it. It was as a result of this concession that he was forced to contradict himself, and Polis went on to point out that this is exactly the situation you relish. He was mocking you then, and I think he was right to do so, but now it's his turn. exactly the same thing has happened to him. To be specific, where I think Polus was at fault was in agreeing with you that doing wrong is more contemptible than suffering wrong. It was this admission of his which enabled you to tie him up in logical knots and muzzle him. He was just too embarrassed to voice his convictions. You pretend that truth is your goal, Socrates, but in actual fact you steer discussions towards this kind of ethical ideas which are unsophisticated enough to have popular appeal, and which depend entirely on convention, not on nature. They're invariably opposed to each other, nature and convention, I mean, and consequently if someone is too embarrassed to go right ahead and voice his convictions, he's bound to contradict himself. This in fact is the source of the clever but unfair, argumentative trick you've devised. If a person is talking from a conventional standpoint, you slip in a question which presupposes a natural point of view, and if he's talking about nature, you substitute convention. On this matter of doing and suffering wrong, for instance, to take the case at hand, Polus was talking about what was more contemptible from a conventional standpoint, but you adopted the standpoint of nature in following up what he said, because in nature everything is more contemptible if it is also worse, as suffering wrong is, whereas convention ordains that doing wrong is more contemptible. In fact, this thing being wronged isn't within a real man's experience. It's something which happens to slaves who'd be better off dead because they're incapable of defending themselves or anyone else they care for against unjust treatment and abuse. In my opinion, it's the weaklings who constitute the majority of the human race who make the rules. In making these rules, they look after themselves and their own interest, and that's also the criterion they use when they dispense praise and criticism. They try to cow the stronger ones, which is to say, the ones who are capable of increasing their share of things, and to stop them getting an increased share by saying that to do so is wrong and contemptible, and by defining injustice in precisely those terms, as the attempt to have more than others. In my opinion, it's because they're second-rate that they're happy for things to be distributed equally. Anyway, that's why convention states that the attempt to have a larger share than most people is immoral and contemptible. That's why people call it doing wrong. But I think we only have to look at nature to find evidence that it is right for better to have a greater share than worse, more capable than less capable. The evidence for this is widespread. Other creatures show, as do human communities and nations, that right has been determined as follows. The superior person shall dominate the inferior person and have more than him. By what right, for instance, did Xerxes make war on Greece or his father on Scythia, **, not to mention countless further cases of the same kind of behavior? These people act, surely, in conformity with the natural essence of right, and yes, I'd even go so far as to say that they act in conformity with natural law, even though they presumably contravene our man-made laws. What do we do with the best and strongest among us? We capture them young, like lions, mold them, and turn them into slaves by chanting spells and incantations over them which insist that they have to be equal to others, and that equality is admirable and right. But I'm sure that if a man is born in whom nature is strong enough, he'll shake off all these limitations, shatter them to pieces, and win his freedom. He'll trample all our regulations, charms, spells, and unnatural laws into the dust. This slave will rise up and reveal himself as our master, and then natural be right will blaze forth. I think Pindar is making the same point as me in the poem where he says, **, law, lord of all, both gods and men. And law, he continues, instigates extreme violence with a high hand and calls it right. Heracles' deeds are proof of this, since without paying for them. Something like that. I don't know the actual words, but he says that Heracles drove off Geryon's cattle without paying for them and without Geryon giving them to him, presumably because it was natural justice for him to do so, in the sense that all the belongings of worse, inferior people, not just their cattle, are the property of a man who is better and superior. These are the facts of the matter, and you'd appreciate the truth of what I've been saying if only you'd forget about philosophy at last and turn to more important things. The point is, Socrates, it's fine for a person to dabble in philosophy when he's the right age for it, but it ruins him if he devotes too much of his life to it. Even a naturally gifted person who continues to study philosophy far into life is bound to end up without the experience to have gained the accomplishments he ought to have if he's to be a gentleman with some standing in society. In actual fact, philosophers don't understand their community's legal system, or how to address either political or private meetings, or what kinds of things people enjoy and desire. In short, they're completely out of touch with human nature. When they do turn to practical activity, then in either a private or a political capacity, they make ridiculous fools of themselves. Just as I imagine politicians make fools of themselves when they're faced with your lot's discussions and ideas. In other words, Euripides was right when he said, "A person shines at and expends his energy on and devotes most of his waking hours to the activity at which he happens to excel. He shuns and reviles anything he's no good at and sings the praises of his own speciality in a self-regarding way, because he thinks this will increase his own prestige. It seems to me that the optimum course is to have a foot in both camps. A certain amount of philosophy helps one to become a cultured person, and it's fine to take it that far. There's nothing wrong with makes people better and superior in your opinion and what they're better and superior at. Callicles, I've already said that they're clever at politics and they're brave. Political power within communities should be in the hands of people with these characteristics, and right consists in them, the rulers, having more than the others who are their subjects. Socrates raises the question whether Callicles' superior people are in control of themselves as well as of their communities. Callicles has rejected conventional morality, which commends self-control. He thinks that happiness involves self-indulgence. The superior man is precisely the one who has worked his way into a position where he can satisfy any and all of his desires. Socrates states the opposite view at some length and with considerable power, but Callicles continues to maintain his Platonistic position. Socrates therefore produces two arguments against the equation of pleasure and good. Socrates, but what are they to themselves, Callicles? Callicles, what on earth are you getting at? Socrates, are they rulers or subjects? Callicles, what do you mean? Socrates, I'm talking about each one of them ruling himself, or is there no need for him to rule himself but only others? Callicles, what do you mean, ruling himself? Socrates, nothing complicated, just what people usually mean by it. That is, being self-disciplined and in control of oneself and mastering the pleasures and desires which arise within oneself. Callicles, what a naive thing to say, by self-discipline you mean folly. Socrates, I can't believe you said that. I don't see how anyone could fail to appreciate that I mean no such thing. Callicles, no, Socrates, that's exactly what you mean, because human happiness is incompatible with enslavement to anyone. What nature approves and sanctions, on the other hand, I'm going to speak bluntly to you now, is this. The only authentic way of life is to do nothing to hinder or restrain the expansion of one's desires, until they can grow no larger, at which point one should be capable of putting courage and cleverness at their service and satisfying every passing whim. Now I don't think most people can do this, and that's why they condemn those who can. They're ashamed and they try to disguise their failings by claiming that self-indulgence is contemptible, which, as I explained earlier, is an attempt to enslave those who are naturally better than them. And why do they praise self-discipline and justice? Because their own timidity makes them incapable of winning satisfaction for their pleasures. Imagine someone born to inherit a kingdom, or someone who lacks this initial advantage, but has been equipped by nature with the resources for gaining some position of power, for becoming a dictator, for example, or a political leader. In all honesty, could anything be more shameful? Could anything be worse for these kinds of people than self-discipline and justice? They would exchange the freedom to enjoy the good things of life without interference from anyone for the voluntary acceptance of a master, namely, the conventions, opinions, and strictures of the majority. Under this wonderful regime of justice and self-discipline, how could they possibly be happy, when even if they did have political power, they wouldn't be able to use it to their friends' advantage and their enemies' disadvantage? No, Socrates, if you want to hear the truth, and you do claim that truth is your goal, it is that if a person has the means to live a life of sensual, self-indulgent freedom, there's no better or happier state of existence. All the rest of it, the pretty words, the unnatural, man-made conventions, they're all just pointless trumpery. Socrates, thank you, Callicles, for this generous and frank elaboration of your position. See, what you're doing here is giving a clear account of things which other people think, but are reluctant to voice out loud. Please, I beg you, do all you can to sustain the momentum, until there's really no chance of our mistaking the right way to live. I have a question for you. We shouldn't restrain our desires, you say, if we're going to fulfill our potential, but should let them grow as large as possible and then do whatever it takes to satisfy them. And this, you claim, is a good state of existence. Is that right? Callicles, yes, that's my position. Socrates, so the idea that people who need nothing are happy is wrong. Callicles, yes, because otherwise there'd be nothing happier than a stone or a corpse. Socrates, but the people you're calling happy have a terrifying life as well. The point is, you see, that it wouldn't surprise me if Euripides' words were true. Who's to say whether life might not be death and death life? Perhaps we really are corpses. In fact, I did once also hear a wise man claim that we are dead and that the body is a tomb, and that the part of the mind which contains the desires is in fact characterized by its susceptibility and its instability. It was this part of the mind, it seems, which a clever storyteller from Sicily perhaps or Italy called a jar, although he derived the name from the fact that it is plausible and persuasive. He also identified fools with non-initiates and said about the part of the mind where the desires are located that in fools, which is to say, when this part is in an unrestrained and uncapped state, it is a leaky jar. This is his analogy for its insatiability. His position is the opposite of yours, Callicles. He produces evidence to suggest that there's no one in Hades, by which he means all that is unseen, worse off than these non-initiates, who go about trying to fill one leaky jar with water they bring to it in another equally leaky vessel, a sieve. Gorgias. According to my source, the storyteller's sieve is the mind. He used the image of a sieve to imply that the minds of fools are leaky, in the sense that they're too unreliable and forgetful to prevent things spilling out. This is pretty extraordinary stuff, I suppose, but it does clarify the evidence which I'd like to use to persuade you, if I possibly can, to change your mind, to prefer an orderly life in which one is perfectly content with whatever is to hand, to a self-indulgent life of insatiable desire. Am I getting through to you at all? Instead of your previous view, do you accept that self-discipline makes for greater happiness than self-indulgence? Or will it make no difference at all to what you think, even if I tell you story after story with the same moral? Callicles, now you're nearer the mark, Socrates. Socrates, all right, here's another analogy from the same school as the one I've just reported. Would you accept something along the following lines as an image for the different ways our self-controlled person and our self-indulgent person live? Imagine that both of them have a number of jars. The jars belonging to one of them are intact and are filled variously with wine, honey, milk, and so on and so forth. And suppose that each of these liquids is rare and hard to come by, and that it takes a great deal of strenuous work to get them. Now, once our first man has filled up his jars, he stops channeling the liquids into his jars and gives them no further thought. As far as they're concerned, he can rest easy. The other character, however, is just as capable of getting the liquids, albeit with the same degree of difficulty, but his vessels are cracked and flawed, and he's forced to work day and night at keeping them full or else suffer terribly. If this is what the two lives are like, then would you say that a life of self-indulgence is happier than one of self-restraint? Does this argument of mine make any impression on you or not? Gorgias, do you begin to agree that a life of restraint is better than a life of indulgence? Callicles, no, I'm not convinced, Socrates, because the one with the full jars can no longer feel pleasure. And that, as I said a moment ago, is the life of a stone, for a person to be fully satisfied and so to stop feeling either pleasure or distress. An enjoyable life, on the contrary, consists in keeping as much pouring in as possible. Socrates, but if there's a lot of stuff pouring in, there has to be a lot of stuff leaving as well, doesn't there? So the jars must be very leaky to let it all out, mustn't they? Callicles, yes. Socrates, now you are talking about living like a gully bird / rather than a stone or a corpse. Tell me, though, is being hungry and eating when one's hungry an example of the kind of thing you're thinking of? Callicles, yes, see Socrates, and being thirsty and drinking when one's thirsty. Callicles, yes, and experiencing desire in all its other forms too, and being able to feel pleasure as a result of satisfying it and so to live happily. Socrates, thank you very much. This is an excellent beginning, and I hope you can carry on in the same vein without embarrassment. Actually, I'd better suppress my sense of propriety too, it seems. The main question I want to ask is whether a lifetime spent scratching, itching and scratching, no end of scratching, is also a life of happiness. Callicles, it's incredible, Socrates, how your arguments are designed purely for popular appeal. Socrates, well, Callicles, that may explain my success in shocking Polus and Gorgias and making them feel embarrassed, but there's no way to shock or embarrass you, you're too brave for that. So please just answer my question. Callicles, well, I'd say that a life spent scratching is a pleasant life. Socrates, and a happy life too then, since it's pleasant. Callicles, yes. Socrates, is that the case only if his scratching is restricted to his head, or, shall I continue this line of questioning? What would you say, Callicles, if you were faced with the whole sequence of related questions? At the head of the relevant list is the life of a male prostitute. Isn't this a terrible, shocking, miserable life? I can't believe you'd go so far as to claim that the endless satisfaction of his needs will make him happy. Callicles, doesn't it embarrass you to steer the argument in this distasteful direction, Socrates? Socrates, is it me who steers it there, Callicles, or is this direction prompted by the reckless assertion that people are happy if they're feeling pleasure, no matter what the source of the pleasure? That is, by the failure to distinguish between good and bad pleasures. Could you tell me once and for all whether in your opinion the pleasant and the good are the same, or whether there's even one pleasure which isn't good? Callicles, I can't say they're different and still be consistent, so I'll say they're the same. Socrates, you're breaking your original promise, **Callicles. If what you say contradicts what you really think, your value as my partner in searching for the truth will be at an end. Callicles, you don't always say what you think either, B. Socrates. Socrates, well, if that's true, it only makes me just as wrong as you. But are you really sure, Callicles, that unrestricted pleasure is good? If it is, all those shocking consequences I hinted at a moment ago will obviously follow, and a lot more besides. Callicles, so you say, Socrates. You have reached the end of the document.